Hey, my name is Jan Verwoert. I'm a writer, musician, and professor for contemporary art and philosophy. And I've been extraordinarily happy to be a writer in residence here in Susch for the past month. What I appreciate about the place, apart from the fact that I could really enjoy being here and writing, is the surroundings that include the museum and the library. And let's say the atmosphere that's generated by the persistent research that the curators of the museum and of the library have done into particular uh, artistic questions raised by the life of particular artists who have been exhibited by the museum and whose work you can then also further study in the library and in the books. I also found when I arrived in the apartment. Um, the reason why I foreground that is because some of the questions I'm also trying to write about coincide with, I guess, some of the urgencies that the artists in the exhibitions, whose work is documented in the books here, how to deal with an art world not just dominated by men, but by men who see the value of art in a particular form of symbolic representation, and for whom the value of art can only be recognized if it is presented on that level of symbolic representation, namely in the key of avant-gardism, big programmatic statements, and very clear conceptual agendas of why art matters. And even though I wouldn't necessarily question the value of such statements, and many of the women artists whose work has been shown in these exhibitions, they do partake in these avant-gardist movements and join in the conceptual experimentation. In their work, these artists, they do actually develop another radical approach to making art, which hasn't that much to do with representing things or challenging things on the level of conceptual representation, but by working through relation rather than representation, which is something that's quite difficult to talk about because obviously, also as the critic that I am, it's then easy to drag the power of relation back to the level of representation. So for people who show work and publish about the work, it's always tricky how to, I believe in my own experience, how to publish and present work that cannot necessarily be reduced to this or that avant-gardistic manifesto. So in the past, I came across people like Anu Pöder, whose work I love immensely and have also tried to show to students and stuff, because she was also among those people who spoke both about sexual trauma and sexual pleasure and about what it means to bodily relate to the world in ever so many ways. And in the same way that I feel someone like Ilona Kesaru has been doing in her work. She's an Hungarian artist, sometimes associated with pop art. I didn't know her work before. I was just so happy to find this publication here and to study it and to understand how, yes, with her partner, she participated in certain avant-gardistic experimentations that declared themselves on a conceptual level, but how she was also experimenting very much with color, with the power of color and texture to reach out to an audience on a central relational level, which has a strong resonance in the work of Jadwiga Madziarska, who, like Kesaru, also spent the time working with puppet theaters, something that I learned from Paulina Orlowska a long time ago, that it was kind of a way to work under the radar of state socialist censorship. But not just that, I guess it working in theater teaches people I'm assuming that's what I learned from her work, so much about what it means to actually communicate with an audience. I think children are probably the worst critics in the world, in the sense that you really feel when they're being activated and you relate to them. So I see someone like Maziavska in her painting as someone who is not just trying to defend whatever categorical notion of abstraction, but who actually uses the texture of the surface of a painting to relate to the audience. Her work has such a strong exploration in terms of what it means to rock the background, to do away with the figure, because you don't need a symbolic narration when you can work with the texture and materiality of the background to tangibly, viscerally relate to an audience, not as a way to give up speaking or naming what you're doing, but to explore and validate an entirely different level of speaking through relation. Someone like Audre Lorde talks about it as the power of the erotics, to be more than just sexuality and morality, but that force which exists between human beings, which allows you to appeal and to connect. And I feel the artists that this museum consistently shows and whose work has been researched to be presented here in these exhibitions and presented in the publications that come alongside with it, are all super crucial in opening up that dimension of the relational, um, on the threshold to the representational. I think there's still so much work to be done to fully grasp the power and inventiveness of these artists. And I think the combination of doing these shows and having the publications go hand in hand with it is just really amazing. Today in the library, I found this book of Charlotte Salomon's Leben oder Theater, Life or Theater, which is just mind-blowingly good, and it resonated a little bit with the work of Marie-Louise Fleisser, a German literary writer from the 20s that I've just been reading at the recommendation of Maximiliane Baumgartner. And I just feel like if we go into the 50s and 60s, to understand that a lot of these attempts at speaking through relation, speaking back to world history, in this case to the atrocities of the Holocaust, through relation, in drawing, in taking everyday emotion and the way how relations are forged and then disrupted by brutal violence, to find a language for that is something that you also find in these artists of the 20s, or writers of the 20s. And I think it also looks for further study. At least, and I'm saying that, I guess, as a critic, as a writer, who would normally be designated to be exactly a kind, let's say, a doorkeeper on the level of symbolic representation, which is a role that I've always thought to be ridiculous, because in that role you don't write, you don't relate. And I guess I'm looking to these artists to understand, how to empathize, or to relate to the power to relate that their work so courageously foregrounds. That's it. Yeah.